Welcome to this episode of the OTT Red Spotlight podcast. In season 5, we're pursuing the theme of high performance, and there are so many different dimensions of the constitution of high performance when it comes to people, platforms, the industry, geographies. But we're going to be taking a unique look in this episode through the eyes of operators over advisors, looking at a new organization here in the region called the Playmaker. I've got the founders here in the studio with me, and some of the constitution of the DNA of their career is absolutely mind-blowing. I feel very gifted to have Ralph and Will here with me at Studio Red for this episode. Welcome to the OTT Red Spotlight podcast, guys.
Fantastic. Thanks for having us.
Well, I know that we are on the clock for this because you guys have got an important call. So I want to get into the meat of the kind of conversation that we've been having, but it would be inappropriate and bad manners of me for the audience as well as with you guys not to give you the stage to actually introduce yourself, and as per the introduction that I just offered, actually talk a little bit about what qualifies you guys as the founders of the Playmakers to be talking about the kind of change and influence that you can be bringing to the market. Where should we start? Are we going with Will first?
Thank you. So, I've been really lucky. I started off my career in consulting. I started off in strategy consulting because I always knew that I wanted to be involved in business, but I didn't know what business I wanted to be involved in or how to do it. And so started off in consulting, you get an amazing foundation of a lot of the skills and interest of financials and theory. And we'll come back to the theme of theory later, but a lot of thought about the theory. But I left consulting quite quickly to go into a business that was an early investor and incubator of small media companies. And that business was fascinating. So I worked with several much older people who'd been through great careers, including at Disney and at other places, and had built up this experience of operating companies. And I, through their guidance and learning, learned a huge amount very quickly about how to go in and work and operate international media companies. And then from there, interestingly, I got headhunted to go and work for Discovery and went to join the Discovery Group at the time when they were building out their international TV business, and they were transitioning from building out the really big linear TV channels in international TV, but transitioning to digital. And it was a fascinating place there of a huge amount of change, but it was a great place to experience big bets on new technology and how new technology could change how people consume media, how people create media and monetize it. And it was there where I met Ralph, and Ralph can introduce himself in a second. But we did, with teams of people there, some really exciting things at the transition from at the start of OTT really across the European market. And then from there, I actually went move across to education technology, and have recently been working in education technology, but have just left education technology to join up with Ralph to go back into consulting and advising companies and operating companies, but also about incubating and launching new businesses, because we believe there's been a huge amount of positive change in the world of media recently, but in media, in sport, and in education, there's still a lot more that can be done. And so we're here to help drive and grow that.
I hope you're enjoying the podcast. Look, the brand elevation that this podcast over the last 5 seasons has brought for OTT Red, my brand, and in this season, sponsors as well, is something that I want to make available to you. If you're enjoying this podcast and you'd like to get this section of the next season to elevate your own brand, then please reach out to me. I'm excited just listening to the introduction of what Playmaker's about. So, Ralph, give us an overview of who you are and what you've been doing with your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I actually started my career in tech. I was a computer science major way back in the day. Interestingly enough, my senior project was in AI before AI is what it is today. And I joined IBM as a software engineer, and then became a systems engineer. So when I say I'm tech, I'm...
You're hardcore, big blue.
Right. And big blue, exactly. And then I went into consulting with Deloitte, and that was at a time when technology was being used to re-engineer companies, business process re-engineering. People really started to look at how technology could change the internals of the business, I would say, right? This was pre-2000. And then I was at Pearson Education when this web thing started. And by the way, I tend to be precise. When you're a techie and you do database design,
Objectivity.
you eliminate ambiguity, right? And so everybody says internet, but actually internet was something 60s and 70s. It was actually the web in the 90s, right? And so World Wide Web, I was at Pearson Education, Simon & Schuster before that, and then it got merged into Pearson Education. And I was responsible for all of the websites and building up the infrastructure for all of these websites, because all of the imprints, all these little businesses launched their own websites. And then we said, no, we can't have that. Let's build infrastructure centralized, right, for websites. And then also added a commerce layer and a subscription layer to that. And that's a whole story onto
It's another
itself.
podcast, Ron.
Huh?
That's another podcast.
Yeah, that's another part. There's
There's a season.
multiple chapters here. All right, so that was really at the very beginning of it. And then I was in a Defender, right? I was in traditional publishing. You don't get more old school publishing than textbook publishing, right? You'd have to go to Papyrus to get more old school than Gutenberg Press, right? And so I joined AOL in the late 90s. And that was like a rocket ship. And I started out running the tech behind MapQuest, Movie Phone, and Digital City. And it was at that time, I was there for 10 years, moved from software engineering to product management. So I ran product for all of the verticals across commerce and entertainment. And then ended up my career at AOL doing international. And I'm, by the way, unlike Will, despite 15 years in London, I don't have a posh British accent. I'm from the Bronx.
I did notice that,
Right.
Ralph, yeah.
From the Bronx, but I've lived in London 15 years now, and I went to London to work for the BBC. 2010, I ran what was known as BBC Future Media, which was responsible for iPlayer, and we can talk more about that at some point. Also, the Olympics in 2012, which is really what drew me there. I was there 6 years. I thought I'd be there 2 or 3. And then post that is when I went to Discovery to run Eurosport Online. And again, that was about doing for Europe and the Olympics what the BBC did in the UK. The BBC in 2012 launched the first digital Olympics, right? iPlayer had every event, right? Every country, real time online and downloads on every device at home, on the go, and in the office, right? And so Zasloff, CEO of Discovery at the time, wanted to do that in Europe because Discovery got the rights to the Olympics across Europe. And so that's where Will and I met to do that. And I was happy being there, except I have a passion for basketball. And this opportunity came up at the NBA, and to be the managing director for the NBA across Europe and Middle East. And so I took that. And that wasn't tech, product, or digital direct to consumer. That was everything, right? That was media rights, sponsorship, all of the business development activity. And that then led to doing the deal with Abu Dhabi to bring the NBA here. And so that was about 6 years ago. And that's when I really started to come here a lot. And even though I left the NBA, they said, Ralph, you can leave the NBA. You cannot leave Abu Dhabi or the UAE. And so I got a golden visa and here we are.
Yeah, and that's maybe how we reconnected as well, obviously through the MBA. But I'd moved here during as part of the education technology industry that I was in. And this region, like with many industries in education, it's a huge focus for the government and for private business here. And in particular, the use of AI and artificial intelligence and digital technology, to see how it can be harnessed best to drive education improvement. So in this region, as you know, there's a big shift from oil-based economies to knowledge-based economies, and how best to help that transition, education, and really improving the educational levels of students across the region. And so I moved over as part of that, and then reconnected with Ralph as part of
And then
this.
we ended up here in the studio. I want to ask you a question, guys, because I think this question will expedite the depth and equity of the experience that we've got sitting here at the table with the context of now and where the media sector is and streaming and actually something beyond streaming, which is something we've touched on before, the creator economy. Because to your point, the UAE government has invested $150 million in the creator economy with Creator HQ. When you take that frontier moment at the BBC and that you experienced as well of streaming becoming recognized not as the future media moment, but actually the now. And like this is what the future is going to be, but it's happening now. Everything that you learn in that moment, being at the BBC, when you look at the different dimensions and dare I even say it, potentially silos of media at the moment, public service broadcasting, mainstream media, printed media, trying to make content and move into content, media tech, all of these different colors on the canvas. What do you make of it, Ralph? What's your perspective of what the art of the possible is with all of these different resources that are on the table?
Yeah, totally. So I'm going to use a word that was considered a dirty word, especially at AOL when AOL merged with Time Warner. And it was the C word called convergence, right? And it recognized that storytelling was fragmented by format driven by technology, right? So reading on paper, listening on radio, watching on television, right? Those are just how do you experience the story, right? But because of the limitations of the technology, those things were segmented, and those segments then drove silos. So at the BBC, when I first came in, there were over 500 websites. Why? Because every silo had its own thing going on. Radio 1 didn't have anything to do with Radio 2 or Radio 3. God forbid they had anything to do with BBC 1 or BBC 2, so on and so forth. Scotland didn't do anything with Wales. It didn't do anything with the England proper, right? And so you had this fragmentation, but partly it was driven because the technology did not allow convergence. So the internet and the web come along, and then now you can take reading, listening, and watching, and you can start to bring those things together into a new storytelling experience, right? So even podcasting started as listening, and then now, sometimes you have uh, uh, the voice is better than the picture.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
some people actually like just audio only.
I do.
But then hey, you're on YouTube now or whatever. But that is essentially convergence, because what technology does is it makes the story more immersive, which is sight, sound, and motion, right? And so my lesson at the BBC was, in terms of making the BBC digital, it wasn't to just digitize the existing silos. It was to demonstrate that through digital, you could bring the story together.
Yeah.
Right? You can read about it, you can Radio 4 program. You can listen about it, and then you could also watch, right? And you bring them together. And that's still happening, right? Because it takes a long time to change these habits that we've had. And so for me, that's the big lesson. And then the question is, so where are we headed with that? I'm a Trekkie. And so, as a Star Trek guy, if you're in the media business, you're in the holodeck business, right? So eventually, we all converge in the holodeck. But on the way there, we're essentially figuring out how to deliver a better experience around the stories that we're trying to tell.
Yeah, and one of the things I think of is almost a point in time. So talking about BBC and sort of almost at the outset of OTT and streaming, there's sort of that point of time. There were a few things. There was a big master vision. There were big targets like the Olympics, like other elements of football qualifiers and World Cups and things that really created the incentive to move fast. And I think actually I did geography as a degree, which I don't talk about very often. But one of the things, it's often a point in time and a place in time. And actually, what I felt being here in the UAE in the last 3 years is that this is bringing together so many of those core ingredients for us to be the point in time and the place in time where big innovation can happen and big change can happen. And I think that happened with the BBC and the iPlayer starting off the streaming industry really in around 2010, 2012 in London. Happened obviously Silicon Valley in the US with so many of the developments and growth there. But now I think we're in the place and time and a point in time around content, around AI, where there's just going to be a huge step forwards in how the industry evolves. It's just going to go through a big leap forwards over the next few years.
For me, the creator economy creates the magnetic north on the compass for the next chapter of the journey of media, let's say. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It might be either or both or whatever. But the reason is because the deficit experienced with so many other dimensions of media is a lack of profitability in the most recent years. And that's caused a whole ripple of implications, complications, and fear. I think, one of my businesses is in the human capital side of media. And I feel that, I host LinkedIn training, for example, for people that have been laid off for different organizations. And I feel that when I'm with those people, the creator economy, actually, I think through the beauty of naivety and the people, the Gen Zs that are in that side, are creating in the cloud, they're editing in the cloud, they're shooting their content on phones. They're not obsessed with the technology, they're fluent in the technology. And I think that that's what's making the processes for production, post-production, and distribution super lean. And that's what's leading to these blossoming P&Ls in the creator economy. What would you say on your radar is the magnetic north for the next chapter? Do you agree with me? Would you challenge what I've just proposed? Or are the mighty brands going to shine through again and just extinguish this moment of brilliance for the creator
Yeah,
economy?
no, this goes in ebb and flows. There are usually no ors, there are ands. When I like to say I'm an OG in the digital space, and at the very beginning, people talked about it would be about massive disintermediation because you can go direct. But actually, what happened was hypermediation, right? And then media goes from unbundling, right, to actually rebundling in a different way, right? So you go from iTunes buying singles to then Spotify, you're essentially renting the whole catalog every month. And so that's the beautiful thing about technology, by the way, and being creative, right? It is you're in the transformation business. And because of the way that the world is moving, the folks that feel most comfortable with transformation are the ones that can adapt, see new opportunities, and go for it. So, creator means to be able to fashion new, right? So, I think at a fundamental psychological level, uh, creators have an advantage, right? And actually, as AI essentially makes it very easy to get anything that's already been created, right? So anything that's already been created that's inside the box, you could get through AI.
Yeah.
But what you can't get through AI is what isn't inside the box, which is what creators do.
Such a great point. Such a great way of describing exactly what AI is. I think everybody now thinks that AI can originate everything, but actually, in what you've just suggested, Ralph, AI doesn't originate anything. It kind of recycles and reaggregates stuff.
Mm. Yeah. And we were talking actually in the car on the way here that interesting, the response to a lot of the OTT and streaming, the traditional broadcasters and traditional companies actually got more complicated and moved away from what was their core differentiator, which was the content and the content creation. And actually, if you look at, say, a traditional broadcaster and how they're now going to market, they've got their linear TV channels, they've got then various different streaming services, often packaged and bundled in separate ways. And whereas the person that was disrupting, or the big group that was disrupting them, Netflix, is actually a very simple business. It has effectively one package across the whole world. But technology and the view of media companies have become packaging and very obsessed with packaging and pricing, which is obviously very important, but it has taken sometimes away from the content creation initially. And I think coming back to that is really important.
Yeah. And so this, break it down to its fundamentals. Media is the intersection of storytelling with technology. And as the technology advances, the way that you experience the story advances. But it's always about the story, because as human beings, that's what we do. We're meaning-making machines that transport meaning to each other through stories. So if you're a creator in the media space, what is being done is intrinsic to who we are as a species. And then the ability to assimilate technology to continually progress that's a huge opportunity. Now, what you had said before is, okay, great, the means of production are available. You have creative people who can take this and run with it. How do you make that sustainable because you're able to make a profit on it, right? And yes, while the cost part may go down, you still have to have the revenue piece. And so streaming hasn't just altered the means of transport, but it has also altered how content is being packaged and priced. And actually, that's something that we spent a lot of time on when we were at Discovery, because we were taking an old school business to business broadcaster through streaming into digital direct to consumer. And so, yes, it was a technical challenge for sure. If you're doing live sport, Olympics online, but it was also a significant commercial and business model challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember thinking a lot about at that time of, you take a football season, and we have some great football rights in different parts of Europe, and there's a big fan base. For sure, there's a big fan base, but the way of monetizing that fan base, there are many different ways of looking at that. And so it was a concept that had been started in the US around, for example, season passes, and introducing that in the world of digital. So you can have a digital season pass. So you can be a fan for that whole season. You get the access for the whole season. But on top of that, and we talked about this a lot back in the day, but when you're a football fan, you're not just a fan when the match happens to be on TV. You're a fan the whole week through, right? And you're wanting to understand what's the team doing now. You're wanting to connect with other people who are also fans of that team. You're wanting to understand how the preparation's going for the match. So opening that up from just the video experience of the live match, which is hugely valuable, and that's where obviously a lot of the rights value goes, into the community around it and the stories that are happening throughout the week is huge. And I think it's really interesting bringing that world of the sport into digital streaming meant that actually opened up the eyes to the community that's very clear in sport, but isn't always in other forms of TV media and media. And I think a lot of companies are now addressing that, looking for the community elsewhere and how to harness that community, how to service them, and obviously also how to profit from them.
In a second, I want to get to the point around what the Playmaker is all about to kind of crystallize how, we've talked on a snapshot of perception and the equity of your experience, guys. But on this point of fandom, it fascinates me because I actually think that's where the really lucrative element of sport, music, even following, like the Avengers, Marvel, that kind of thing, fandom and that to me is the gravity behind the story. That's what creates the cohesive nature of engaging a massive community. There's an amazing woman called Meredith Levine. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she is the world's #1 fanthropologist. She's been on the podcast. You should definitely look up Meredith. And what Meredith has done is forensically dissect what a following constitutes, and not just in the streaming age, all the way back to Egyptian kings and queens and the Beatles and Madonna, and how different the different pace of technologies and life have affected what the constitution of a following is and how fickle actually it's become because it's omnipresent nowadays because of the digital presence of that figure. Does that kind of fanthropology, fandom, something like that, in your mind, create some of the opportunity on the commercial landscape of media to drive further loyalty, monetization, all of that sort of stuff?
Totally. It's intrinsic. And I'll weave that into the Playmaker piece, right? We both have this experience in sport, and the reason that we named our company Playmaker Ventures Group is that the role of a playmaker in sport is to make it happen, to be the catalyst for change, to set other people up, right? And that's how we see ourselves, as being playmakers to help drive that change and to help set people up. Some people are really good when they get the ball and they'll make the shot. But setting up the play is
Different skill.
it's a different skill. Exactly. And so that's one sport thing. The second sport thing is actually consulting firms talk about their methodology or their approach. We talk about it in terms of playbooks, right? So we have a playbook for each one of these interest areas that we have. And what cuts across all of that is the fact that actually we're in service of the fan, right? Most entities, and this, I come from a product world, but software engineering, if you do it properly, it's you put the user at the center of the universe. A lot of folks don't do that, right? They'll put the program at the center of the universe. I used to challenge my colleagues at the BBC. Being from the Bronx, I was comfortable doing that. I didn't follow proper British
I can only
protocol.
imagine what those meetings were like when you get the guy from New York challenging a load of British guys.
Totally. They loved it. They loved it. They gave me permission to do that. I said, if I ever go native, shoot me, right? I've lost value. But one of my challenges was, do you actually care about the people who are watching or listening? And they would say, of course we care. And I said, I actually think you care about your program. And if those people are an audience to your program, you care about them. But the second that they're not watching or listening, you don't care about them anymore, right? Therefore, then, how do you really focus on the people formerly known as the audience, right? In education, the school, the teacher, how about focus on that kid learning and They can learn in the classroom, they can learn at home, they can learn on the go. So education's what you push on them. Learning is the experience of a kid or an adult
Yeah, building new skills and growing.
building new
Yeah.
skills, right? In sport, it's focus on the team, focus on the players. How about focus on the fan? And when you focus on the fan, it becomes about how do you empower their pursuit of their passion, right? And it could be watch live game, it could be buy merchandise, it could be talk to others about it before and after the game. It could be bet on it. It could be play it. Or it could be all manner of things. But actually, what you've done is you've put the fan at the center of the universe, and you ask yourself the question: how do you enable them to pursue their passion by combining content, commerce, and community? And when you unlock the ability to monetize that, because guess what? Fans will gladly pay you if you're enabling them to pursue their passion.
The reason that what you've just said, Ralph, really arrests me is because another dimension of media that we're moving into is wearables, AR, immersive entertainment. Actually, if you think of what Meredith advocates in terms of anthropology and immersive experiences, we used to go to an arena to experience that kind of feeling of listening to U2 or your favorite. If you look now at the kind of media tech convergence, to use a concept you spoke earlier, you've got Atem and Axido actually creating a wearable experience for Formula One. Now, I'm a Formula One nuthead. I love Formula One. The opportunity to pop a pair of goggles on and to be able to look at different statistics and what's happening and listen to what the pits are saying to whichever car I want. Like for me, I'm like, I don't care how much that costs. I just want it. It's this point of convergence that you were talking about earlier. So, well, how does the Playmaker take all of the experience that you guys have got, Playmaker Ventures, sorry, and start to converge these into these playbooks in the instance of any assignment that you're engaged on for your clients to experience proximity to value?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And as Ralph was saying, we're building these playbooks. We've built these playbooks over our years of experience working in so many different situations. And I think both Ralph and I have got such experience in different countries and different markets at different stages of these markets, transitioning to digital, evolving, that we've got these so many experiences to be able to look back on and say, well, when I was in this, it was like this, and this was how we adapt these playbooks for the real life experience. And so these playbooks that we've built up over the years, now formalizing and work with the clients to use those experiences, to use the practical, some of the theory, but the practical hands-on ability to implement something. And so an engagement with a typical client would be understanding, obviously, the situation, but then what's the play? To Ralph's point, what's the play? How best can you navigate all of those different factors that you're up against to make the best play to succeed in the future, drawing on those playbooks?
Yeah. And so what Will was describing is the advisory part of what we do, right? And in that part, like to say operator over advisor. So even though we're providing advisory, we're doing it as operators. That's different than you bring in a consulting firm, set of advisors, they give you nice theory, right? But the second that culture starts to eat strategy for breakfast,
Yes.
how do I?
That big presentation gets left on a shelf and ignored.
Exactly. And so, but that's advisory. I'd say so it's Playmaker Ventures Group. The ventures part of that is the idea of a venture studio, right? Where we take and we incubate ideas. A lot of them are own ideas, or if we have a client that has ideas that need to be incubated, right? And so we have concepts, products that we're looking at that span sport, uh, media, and ed tech
Yep.
as well, right? And the idea there is let's get to prototype and MVP very quickly, maybe in a low code or no code way using AI, get that to a point where an investor can see it. We're helping determine fit, and maybe we get it invested in, and then we go off to the races. And then the third piece is what we've referred to as the experience platform. And so I've never been into the lean startup. You know how be lean, lean, lean. Here's your incubator. You have space. We'll give you advice. You go, right? Actually, I don't like that. I like fat startup. And what fat startup means is that all of the services, an identity service, an advertising service, a subscription service, right? All of the services that are really generic services. Why should you rebuild any of those? You should just have access to those so that then you can take your content, your idea, and spend 90% of your time with that rather than recreating the wheel. And an example of that, and this gets to the creator piece that you mentioned, is one of the partners that we have is a company called Kiswi, right? And they're an OTT company, but that does digital and direct to consumer. And in sport, they power things like NBA Phoenix Suns or the Utah Jazz or what have you. But in addition to that, they've extended beyond sport because of this notion of fandom into music and the creator economy. So in music, they're the ones that power that Korean band BTS, the million plus online paying subscribers to watch that concert. Right before, you'd get 100,000 people max into a stadium versus reach the global
So Kiswe are
community
doing
at the
that with
same.
some sort of D2C
Yes,
platform
yes,
specifically for them?
exactly. And so that's what I mean about fat startup is, hey, have access to the Kiswe platform so you don't have to recreate all of that. What is the event or the idea that you want to get in front of your audience? And then that moves you up the monetization curve, because if you're a creator and you're on YouTube, fantastic. You got good advantages. You didn't have to build the tech, and there's built-in audience there. But the business model and the data, let's just say there's a reason why YouTube's making a lot of money, right? But can you take YouTube and have that just be the funnel to aggregate audience, but then bring them to more of a premium experience that you're powering using Kiswe or whatever direct to consumer mechanism, so that your ARPU, your revenue per user, goes up significantly, right? And that becomes symbiotic with YouTube developing audience, but then coming up with premium experiences that allow you to monetize a segment of that audience at a much larger level. So this is where the tech comes together with distribution and the way you think about your business model wrapped around the stories you want to tell and the audiences you're trying to reach.
There's another element that you've just mentioned, Ralph, that I think's more and more important to whatever the form of creator it is, whether it's a band or a sports team or an individual. The YouTube model kind of acts as a bridgehead, a vehicle to revenue on a rev share basis, but the ownership of the first party data remains with YouTube. And once the residual associated to the ownership, the proximity to that first party data is closer to the sports team or the band or the creator in whatever form it might exist. Actually, that's what really begins to accelerate the art of the possible when it comes to the engagement with that fan base as well. I mentioned earlier that it's usually the case that when I'm able to get guys at your level into the studio, I'm on the clock. I think we're probably reaching a point where you guys might need to prepare to leave. So I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions more, and then your interrogation is over. Number one, if somebody wants to engage with Playmaker Ventures, how do they do that? And number two, if anybody is listening to you guys and thinking, wow, I feel blessed and lucky to have got the chance to listen to that, let alone be me and ask you these questions, what would be the one observation, one piece of advice that you would offer based on all of your experience to where the market is now and where it's going if they wanted to position themselves advantageously? Maybe let's start with that one, then we'll finish up with how people can engage you if they want to speak to you.
So, this operator over advisor is one of the principles that we have that positions us and differentiates us, right? Another one is one that I would use as that piece of advice, which is platform over product, right? And again, I'm a techie. Product market fit, right? That's what you're seeking. You're always seeking product market fit, right? And you could do very well with product market fit. You find product market fit, you're going to do very well for that product, right? My preference, and the reason I say platform over product, is I'm seeking platform ecosystem fit, because that transcends products, right? And so there's survive, product market fit, and then there's thrive, platform ecosystem fit. The reason that YouTube or Facebook, or in my day, AOL, I learned a lot of these playbooks being at AOL. We created a lot of these practices, is data and access to data is what enables you to run a platform, right? And so that's why they're succeeding, because they take the data from your product and from your product and your product, and what are they doing? They're getting the best view on you as a person. They understand you as a person, and then they can source all the other products that you as a person would want. And because they're good at doing that, you as a person will continue to engage with them. And therefore, then, you're just a means to their production, right? And so looking to go from a product position to a platform position where you have data. And then I'll just make a little aside that on AI, right, the way you get a differentiated AI position is proprietary data sets. So again, the ability to establish your own data and have access to proprietary data sets is going to be a significant differentiator in anything that's happening with tech. That's another chapter, by the way.
I think we've got a whole season of episodes to do from this. Just quickly in response to that, before you wrap us up, Will, I was lucky enough to do a podcast a couple of weeks ago with the chairman and founder of Conviva, Hui Zhang. And it was an amazing hour that I spent with him. But the essence of what he said to me is very similar to what you just said. He said, we were talking about OTT Red, and he said, Chris, what you've created is the open source of human capital for the market. And your platform ecosystem concept conjures the same kind of imagery in my mind around the interaction, the almost symbiotic or organic interaction between multiple things that create the ability to survive and thrive. So it's interesting when you ask people these kind of questions, the similarities and the resonance between the responses.
And I want to actually touching on that from my recent education experience. So we talked a lot about that, the platform and the ecosystem and almost the view of the fan. In the world of education, there's a big parallel, a view of the child and that sort of whole view of the child and how to help a child learn faster, more effectively, to understand the unique learning gaps and the unique challenges that particular strengths, weaknesses that particular child has, to be able to help improve the education for that child is a very similar concept to learning the fan and how to support the fan to experience and to interact with their passion as much as possible. And so those similarities thread through many different industries, which is really
Whoever's on the receiving end.
yeah. Yeah. And so then in terms of how to work with us and obviously the doors are open to contact us and love to have a chat with any companies at this interesting intersection that we've been talking about.
What kind of companies, Will? What kind of companies would see the most value in engaging?
And I guess we look at those different elements of what we were talking about with Playmaker Ventures Group, from the advisory business to the ventures business to then the live experience. And that actually caters to all kinds of sizes of companies. On the advisory business, it can be startups scaling up or scale ups trying to become larger businesses. But also there's a lot of very large businesses, multinational businesses looking, for example, to grow here in the Middle East and build relevant propositions here in the Middle East. And so that's a theme that we're working with a lot. So on that advisory side, we've got all kinds of different size companies in the industries that we've been talking about, from media, sport, entertainment, education. And then in the ventures business, it's really around those startup scale-ups and those industries that we've been talking about, but who are on the cusp, have great ideas and wanting to really build and grow those into a business. And that's where our experience and then our network can help to propel them.
And just to qualify an element of what you just said, Will, you mentioned the Middle East. Are we talking about the UAE being the heartbeat of your presence and then reaching to Saudi, Oman, other areas within the GCC? What's the kind of footprint at the moment in terms of your ambitions or your existing?
Yeah, and we've got experience between us from all over the world, from working in all different markets across the world. And I mean, a thread from both of us is international and international growth, especially around digital disruption. And so actually, well, we're based in the UAE and in London, and so those would be key elements of focus. We have that, and the heartbeat, as you say, we will help companies to grow across, and we are focusing on growing across many different markets internationally. And we're in a great place here because you can get everywhere from the UAE.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, I have to say, personally and professionally, it's been an absolute pleasure to welcome you to Studio Red this afternoon. It's a gift to meet the people that I meet as the host of the podcast. And again, personally and professionally, I wish you all the best with Playmaker Ventures. And I hope in some way to play a part of your ongoing success. Thank you for being guests.
Fantastic.
Thank you.